Hello, and welcome to Monumental, where we sit down with entrepreneurs, leaders, visionaries, and big thinkers making monumental change. Here's your host, Evan Holiday.
Welcome to Monumental. I'm your host, Evan Holiday, and today we have on the show the master of networking and adding massive value to others, Travis Chappell. Travis, great to have you on the show today.
Evan, thanks a lot for having me, my man. Happy to be on.
Yeah. Honestly, very, very glad we got you on the show, and Travis is doing some amazing things. So Travis is a direct sales consultant, real estate investor, and professional connector. He's the creator and host of Build Your Network podcast, which is a top 25 business podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs cultivate genuine relationships, grow their inner circle, and leverage a powerful network the right way. And I first came across Travis from his amazing podcast that both on iTunes and Instagram, and he was really blowing it up on Instagram. I was like, man, we have to have this guy on Monumental. So Travis, let's just jump right in and take us back to before your Build Your Network podcast. And what were you doing before the podcast?
Yeah, man. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I know that as a host, it's always a battle to try to figure out who you want to bring on the show. So I always appreciate when people are willing to bring me on the show. So I appreciate you taking the time to ask and then make it happen. So before the show, I was a door-to-door salesman. That's what I did for the first part of my career, really. I started door-to-door when I was in college and did it for about 6-7 years, just knocking doors, training people, managing, recruiting, all that kind of stuff. So I eventually got to the point where I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do long-term. And I've always been kind of a long-term thinker, just always looking like at least a decade into the future and like basically asking myself, am I on the trajectory to where I want to be? And if I'm not on that path, then I need to adjust something. I need to shift something right now so that I can end up where I want to be in 10 years from now. And so I basically kind of stopped like cold turkey, just kind of stopped knocking doors and had no idea what I wanted to do. So I just, like, for the first time in my life, I dove into personal development. And I just I was reading some books. I was listening to audiobooks. First time ever jumped into listening to podcasts. Just was consuming a ton of stuff because I just had no idea. I was looking for some direction. I was looking for an answer to what I wanted to be doing next. And through that, consuming a ton of content on podcasts and things like that, I was like, oh, I think it'd be cool just to kind of do this and like start my own podcast and kind of go this route. And plus, not to mention, it'll help me get to know a ton of people and maybe help me have some more direction on the next thing that I want to do after podcasting and things like that. And then it kind of took off and turned into now what I do full time. So now I'm just a full-time podcaster after a couple of years of putting out a ton of content.
That's awesome, man. I love that. Did you plan on being a podcaster at the beginning, or was that you just kind of fell into it?
Yeah, it was definitely the plan. I had no idea what the timeline would be. Like, I was just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
What to kind of expect from the work that I'm putting in. I had seen what other people had done, but a lot of the people that I had followed were, they started their podcasting journey in 2011, 2012, when there was 100,000 podcasts or whatever, and there just weren't a ton of options, and it wasn't as easy to create one, and they had to actually do work to figure it out and things like that. So I think their followings, grew and exploded a lot faster than what you can do now. And so I was looking at their timelines, trying to figure out and adjust in my head of like, is that realistic now? What would it take in order for me to duplicate that type of growth trajectory and things like that? So it was definitely the goal from the beginning. I just had no idea how it was going to be accomplished or if and when, like all those things. It was just kind of up in the air.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, back in the day, there was 100,000 podcasts. And what is it now today? Like close to 700,000?
750,000, I think, was the last stat I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty, it kind of makes people think like, well, why should I start a podcast if there's so many other people out there? And then I think there's, as exactly what you do is you help people start podcasts now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, if you're always worried about saturation, then you're never going to do anything, just get over it, look at the infancy of the platform itself, right? Like television, radio, stuff like that has been around for decades. And you still see people dumping money and starting new TV shows and they're always looking for the next thing that's going to resonate and take off and do well. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice by looking at the overall number and saying, well, I can't compete with that. First of all, you just got to niche down. You got to find your own blue ocean to operate in. If you start a general entrepreneurship show, it's probably going to get lost in the noise because there's 150 shows that are just like it, that are doing really, really well already, that have been around for 5 years. So go find an area to operate in that not a lot of people are operating in, which for me was networking. There wasn't anybody that was fully dedicated to just networking. Everybody touches on it. Everybody talks about it. They might have an episode or two where their guest focuses on it, but nobody had a show that was completely dedicated to learning how to build relationships and learning how to connect with people the right way. And so that was my own blue ocean to operate in. And all of a sudden, when there's 500,000 at the time, I think there was 550 or 600,000 when I started mine. When there's that many, but there's not any that are focusing on networking, all of a sudden I'm, operating in my own space and I can do my own thing. Not to mention, I think that if you just get really good, that people can't ignore you anyway. And that was the mantra that I wrote on my whiteboard when I first started. It was a Steve Martin quote that says, be so good, they can't ignore you. Because I knew that if you jump into a saturated space and you just get really, 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 really good, that people can't ignore you past a certain point. They have to pay attention to you. They have to give you the respect that you deserve for the skill sets that you've developed. And so that was kind of the big thing for me from the start, was just, hey, be so good they can't ignore you. Tom Bilyeu says there's always room for the best. And that's coming from somebody who built $1 billion protein bar company. The most saturated space in the world is supplements and nutrition. And he built $1 billion company in, the late 2000s doing something like that. And so he said, yeah, there's always room for the best. If you can just become the best, there's always going to be room for you. But then looking at the podcasting platform specifically as a whole, there's 2 billion users on Facebook. There's, over 1 billion on Instagram, maybe 1.5 billion. LinkedIn, I think, has 600-700 million now. They're coming up on 1 billion. There's 500 million YouTube channels, 500 million. There's 500,000 books that come out every single year. And there's 750,000 total podcasts. If you look at that in comparison to every other platform that exists, it's still a super, super young platform, and there's still a ton of room for growth. What I would do is look at the big money. Look at what big money's doing. Big money is focusing a ton on creating quality content and podcasts right now. If big money's doing that, then probably something you should be paying attention to. If large institutions and banking and all these, venture capitalists and stuff are just throwing money at something, then they probably believe in the economics of it being long-term. And it's probably something to jump on board with. But ultimately it comes down to what your goals are, because if you're sitting there thinking I don't want to start a podcast because there's no way I can compete and become a top podcast. Well, you don't necessarily need to have a top podcast to make good money from your podcast. You can have a podcast that not a lot of people know about. But if you have 10 or 20 true fans from that podcast, you can build a multi-six-figure business off of just a few true fans. You get 1,000 downloads an episode, great. 25 true fans, awesome. Now you can make a full-time living off of just your podcast, or you can keep doing what you're doing full-time and let that podcast feed what you're doing. It only helps you. It only helps amplify whatever it is that you have going on. If you don't want to go my route, if you don't want to go the full-time podcaster route and you just want to use it as a tool, then it's great for that too. There's more than just one reason to start a podcast, and there's more than just one outcome, right? That you don't have to have 20 million downloads to have a successful show, right? There's so many other definitions of a successful show. So I encourage as many people as I can to jump on it, especially now while there's only 750,000. People look at it wow, that's a lot, but no, it's still an only.
Yeah, exactly.
When there's 10 million, you'll be hey, remember when there was only 750,000?
We should have started back then.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Honestly, there's so many different directions we could take this because, I love that the first two things you hit on were focus on your niche. Don't try to go broad. Don't try to go after every single person on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher.
Because
go
that's the
after
problem.
Your niche.
People want to be the next Joe Rogan, and they're well, I'm gonna do what Joe Rogan does. I'm gonna have 3-hour conversations with my buddies in my basement, and we're gonna smoke weed and drink beer and sip on whiskey or smoke cigars, and it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna take off. The reason that works is because it's Joe Rogan. Like people are already invested in his journey and his career. Like people care about him and know who he is. Like nobody wants to, like, no offense, bro, but like nobody wants to sit down and listen to you and your three best buddies, like shoot the shit, talk about nothing for 3 hours because they don't know who you are. And you've not done anything amazing. Like Joe Rogan has those conversations with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and that's all of a sudden
Elon Musk.
Yeah, like, and at the beginning, they weren't that big names, but it was still Joe Rogan. Like, you can't duplicate those types of things and expect to see like huge success from it.
Right.
You need to find your own area to operate in, and like the bigger you get, you can become wider and wider and wider. Like your reach can become different and evolve over time, but you have to start narrow because you need to start building a loyal audience somewhere. And then when that audience starts sharing your content, then all of a sudden you can get a little bit wider. Like when I first started my show, it was only about networking. I asked only like specific networking questions for, 30 minutes. And that's how I did my show for like the first 7,500 episodes. But now it's a lot broader than that. I'll bring somebody on. We talk about their story. We talk about what it is that made them successful. And then we talk about networking for a few minutes, like towards the end of the conversation. Like we always bring it around. We always sprinkle it throughout the conversation, but now it's a lot broader because the audience that I brought in is like, growing. So when your audience is growing, you can kind of get your message a little bit broader, but you have to start super narrow and then like attack that narrow vertical and then start expanding out into more of a reach.
So going back to when you first started the podcast, why did you pick networking and were you passionate about that?
It was interesting to me as really what the answer was, because a little bit about my background is I grew up in a really small religious bubble type of a community. And so when I left that community and I didn't go into ministry, which is what I went to college for and things, I was kind of starting from scratch in terms of my network. Like I didn't really know anybody at that point. Everybody that I knew was in that other small bubble that I had just left. So when I was starting out, like the richest person, the most successful monetarily person that I knew was making $150,000 a year. So like that doesn't exactly make for super compelling podcasting content. So I just didn't have any network around me. And I knew that I wanted to maximize my income, but I didn't have anybody around me that knew how to do it. So I was like, well, I can either try to just figure it out on my own, or I can go get around a bunch of people who know how to do it and can show me the ropes and teach me how to do it. And so it was a message that kind of really resonated with me and was near and dear to my heart, because I was literally starting from scratch and I didn't have anybody in my network. I didn't have I didn't have the friend whose dad was super rich to who I could go ask questions. Like I just didn't have any of those connections, like literally none. So that message really resonated with me. And I knew that I needed to do a lot of networking in order to get in touch with the people that I wanted to bring on my show. So it was kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it was like, I know I want to get better at networking. I want to talk about networking. I had no idea how to do it when I first started. But that's the cool thing about podcasts, man. That's the cool thing about content creation is you don't have to be the expert. Yeah. You can just be the reporter. You can be the investigator. So like people just get more invested in your journey as you go along, because the people that started listening to my show when I first started and I didn't know anything about it and have now followed it all the way through to what it is now, and like heard a lot of and saw the evolution in my guest quality, starting from the beginning to where it is now. Like all of those people are huge advocates of what I do because they saw every part of the process.
Right.
And they watched me grow. Like they grew with me, right? Like I was just interviewing amazing people and reporting back to my audience what I learned from them. And then I implemented it into my life and my audience have been implemented into their life. But my learning was exponential because I was talking to every single guest one-on-one and asking the questions that I was curious about. And then the podcast itself kept me accountable to keep learning about the topic. And I've read the, top probably 10 networking books that are out there. Because I feel an obligation to bring the best quality content to my audience as I possibly can. So now I read all the books and I consume the material. When a new book comes out on how to communicate better with people or how to talk, like Malcolm Gladwell just came out with Talking to Strangers. I just picked up that book on Audible because like that's something that one of the most prestigious authors, psychologists of our time wrote a book about, how to
Yeah.
communicate with strangers. Like, I want that book because I want to know how I can better serve my audience, which just makes me like better at what I do anyway. Right. So like you don't have to be the expert at what you do. So I selected networking because it was something I knew I needed to do and something that I didn't know anything about that I knew I needed to be better at. And it was, to be honest, it was the blue ocean. Like, I was going to do sales. I looked up, I was like, oh, I've done door-to-door sales for a long time. I'll just do something on sales. And when I searched sales in iTunes, there was like 300,000 results. And when I searched networking in iTunes, there were like 0. So that was really what ultimately made the decision.
That's amazing, man. I love that story. Like, I feel like a lot of people can resonate with that, of how you literally, you started out with no network. And I feel like that's a limiting belief a lot of people have with starting anything. They're like, well, I don't know anything. I don't know anyone. They put these blocks in front of them, and you took that and said, hey, I'm going to use that to my advantage. And I'm going to turn that around and say, hey, I'm going to learn how to network with people. And then I'm going to share that with people. And it's going to be a compounding, self-fulfilling effect. So I
Right.
love that. And that's amazing. I mean, you've had a lot of success with that. You've had on Grant Cardone, David Meltzer. I mean, plenty of other names that are just top level people, Tom Bilyeu, that a lot of either podcasters or people that read books on self-development, or people that just aspire to that level, look up to all these people, and you've been able to connect with them. So I applaud you for that. And then it's just amazing to hear your story of how you went from no network and having, you said the highest income person you knew was making 150,000 a year. And now you're probably talking to some of the top 1%.
Yeah, I mean, it just last month I talked to Tillman Fertitta on the podcast, who's like 100 I think he's 143 on Forbes list of richest people in the world.
Yeah.
Owns the Houston Rockets. He owns like the single largest like company in the country, privately owned company in the country. Like, he's never taken on investment money. He never IPO'd. He's got like, I want to say $6-7 billion in assets with all of his restaurant chains and Golden Nugget casinos and the Rockets and all these things that he owns. And like, people like that I've been able to have conversations with, it still blows my mind, bro. Like, it's just like, wow, like I just got to like talk to that guy for like 35 minutes. Like, people would pay, $100,000 to have a meeting with this dude for a half hour, and I just got to do it totally for free and share his content on my podcast. Like, it's such an amazing thing. Like, Jeff Hoffman, the founder of Priceline.com, multi-billionaire, and just so many people where it's just like, it's crazy, man, to look back on, for sure.
Yeah. And honestly, that's something, I want to learn from you, and I want to share with our audiences, is how are you connecting with these top 1%ers, these high achievers, these people that already have a booked schedule? How are you able to connect with them and add value in their life?
Yeah, so I have a whole course on this. It's totally free, by the way. I'm not trying to sell anything. It's meetyourherocourse.com, and I'm coming out with a book on this very topic because it's the thing that I get asked about the most, which you could probably guess. But the answer for me is pretty simple. You start with one person. Start with one accessible, well-connected person and add a ton of value to that individual. So much so that they have no choice but to introduce you to a bunch of their friends who are also on that level and in that same area. So for me, that was with John Lee Dumas, who's an all-star podcaster, who's probably the king of business podcasting. He's been doing it since 2012, and he's built a multi-million-dollar business off of the back of his podcast. Full-time podcaster, automated business. His gross to net income ratio is absolutely insane. When he has a $200,000 month, the dude like nets 180,000 of it or something stupid.
That's
like that.
Amazing.
It's crazy how low his expenses are. But anyway, I like looked at that guy and I was like, that's incredible. He's put 2,000. Now he's like 2,300 episodes in. At the time when I reached out, he was like at 1,600 episodes. He had conversations with the best of the best in terms of the entrepreneurship space, the Tony Robbins and Gary Vaynerchuk and Tim Ferriss's of the world. And so I knew he was super well connected, and I figured out a way to access him. And then I figured out a way to add value to him enough to where like I built a good enough friendship with him to where I could start leveraging his name to continue to build connections in the same or similar industry. And then I just continued to do that keep reaching out to those types of people who are well connected, and add a ton of value to them and build a real relationship, a real friendship, not just one that's transactional, but add value. Don't expect much in return, and and sometimes it doesn't work out, bro. Like, honestly, I've paid for a couple of other things. Like, since I did one with JLD, I was just like, man, I'm going to just keep doing this and duplicating this process.
Yeah.
There's been a couple people that I've paid money to that I've tried to get to know who haven't helped me at all. Like, they didn't reciprocate any of the value that I gave to them. And sometimes that sucks, but like, it's just part of the game, and you can't expect it because we didn't ever sign a contract that said that, hey, if I do this for me. So like, you just kind of have to realize that, hey, that maybe that's just a person that I don't super vibe with, or we don't resonate with each other super well. Now I'm just going to go find somebody else that might, reciprocate a little bit more. And I think sometimes you just got to change your reciprocity style with people who have more of a taking tendency rather than a giving tendency. You just got to kind of change your reciprocity style with people like that. But like, it didn't stop me from continuing to do the same activity.
Right.
It just made me go find other people who were, people that I would maybe resonate with more. So, but I think it's just simple enough with like starting with that one connection, getting to know them, adding value, and leveraging that into more connections.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mentioned JLD, and he was part of your journey and a big part of your journey. So he actually, his free podcasting course that helps you get started was a big part of how I got Monumental in place.
Yeah.
And we had him on Monumental about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely agree with you. It's like finding people that are in the space where you want to be in and being able to connect with them and create and add massive value. And one of the ways you are adding value is by having them on your platform.
Mm-hmm.
But then going even above and beyond that. So I think you even went above and beyond that with JLD. Is that right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that one was so important for me because it was the first person that I ever met, like the first person I ever met that was a millionaire, let alone like got to learn from them and like hang out with them. So I think that's why it was such an important connection for me and why I did so much to cultivate that connection. I mean, he hosted a mastermind at his house back in May of 2017 before I launched my show, and I paid to go out to that. And at the time, it was a significant investment for me. It was $6,500 mastermind weekend at his house in Puerto Rico. The most I had ever invested in myself at that point was like $20 for a book. You know what I'm saying? So like $6,500 was a hefty amount for me at the time. And so I made that investment. And then while I was there, like that's already a value add, right? To buy somebody's high ticket program that they want to sell out, like that's already a value add, just buying it and showing up to his house, right? Just like believing in his brand enough to say, hey, I'm going to pay you this much money to teach me something. Like that in and of itself is a value add. But when I was there, I tried to make myself a little bit different from everybody else as well. And I offered to do stuff for free. Like, so this is exactly what I did. He was speaking, he's a keynote at a podcasting conference coming up, and he had a booth there that he was going to sell books at. He created these journals, the Freedom Journal, Mastery Journal, now the Podcast Journal. And he didn't have time to like sit at the booth and sell journals because he had to be out and about talking to people, showing his face in different meetings, and then speaking and all those things. So he had a volunteer that was going to be working the booth, and he was like, hey, Travis, since you have experience in sales, would you mind stopping by and just like training that guy for like 10 minutes, just like give him a few pointers, maybe one-liners that he could use to sell more journals while he's there. And so I said, yeah, 100%, man. If it makes it easier, I'll just work the booth for you. And so that's what I ended up doing. I ended up showing up, like volunteered my whole weekend. And instead of attending the podcasting conference that I could have learned stuff at, you know what I'm saying? Like it was, I launched my show a week before that podcasting conference. So I could have been, you know what, John, like I would volunteer, but I want to go in and learn from like, from some of the modules and sessions and stuff like that. So
promote your podcast
maybe next time or whatever, so, but I didn't do that. And I did something different. And I said, whatever is going to add value to you is what I'm going to do. So I volunteered my time. I paid for my own hotel, my own travel and stuff. I worked the booth for free, didn't ask for anything. I didn't get commissions, like any of that stuff, just helped and as much as I could. So that one went well. He invited me to another event that I ended up working the booth for him again. And like through that process, that's how like I actually got to know the guy, and build a real relationship, not just like, hey, I'm a fan, right?
Yeah.
Hey, this is Travis. He's a guy that paid me one time to come to my house. Like now
Right.
it's like a much different introduction when he introduces me to people, because like he's seen my work ethic, he's seen my skill sets, he's seen a lot of those things in action, and he knows that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be successful. So he feels comfortable making those introductions to people, like high quality people in his own network, because he knows that I'm not going to be somebody that takes those things for granted, that I'm going to like maximize every connection, and I'm going to treat people really well with the respect that they deserve. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. People don't want to make introductions to people because they don't trust people. They don't know, just don't know you well enough. It's not because they're upset at you, or they don't think that you're high caliber. It just means that they don't know you well enough to know that if they take the time to introduce you to this high net worth individual, or highly successful or highly influential individual in their network that they've taken the time to build rapport with, they don't know if you're going to take that connection and like totally trash it and make their reputation go down in that person's eyes, or if they're going to help build that reputation in that person's eyes. So they can't make the introduction unless they want to chance ruining the relationship that they've built, like they've taken a lot of time to build. Does that make sense? So like people get so butthurt about it and just like, oh man, I can't believe they wouldn't introduce me. Like that's so selfish. And it's like, no. It just takes a lot to build good relationships with some of these people. So like, because people now ask me for this all the time, like, hey, can you make an introduction to this person? Can you introduce me to this person? Can you introduce me to this person? And I'm just like, most of the time, the answer is probably no, because like I do now. That being said, I still connect a ton of people. Like I connect people all the time, and I look for ways to connect people.
Yeah.
Usually when people ask me for one, it's just like, man, I honestly don't have enough social capital with that person to make an introduction. Like you know what I mean? Like just because I had him on my show doesn't mean like we're besties.
Yeah.
You know? And that's a relationship that I want to continue to develop. So like, I can't use the little amount of social capital that I have right now to like make an introduction to you when I don't even know you very well. And I don't know if you're going to treat that relationship well at all, which might just like destroy any relationship that I have with the person that I worked hard to build to begin with. So like, there's all this stuff going on in the background.
Yeah.
And the only thing that like makes it to where people trust that you're going to do a good job with the people that they introduce you to is the amount of value that you've added to that person, because they know that like, hey, Travis is somebody that anytime I've introduced them to somebody, they've always had a good experience. And I know that he's going to be that kind of a person because he did the same thing with me. So now you build up that reputation with enough people, and then everybody starts to connect you with everybody else because everybody starts to trust that you're going to do a good job with the connections that they give to you. Does that make sense? Sorry, I know that was kind of a lot, and it was kind of confusing, but yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. And I think you bring up a lot of good points, and really kind of in summary is that, you have to be giving to your first relationship in order to ever build out that relationship, in order to build the network that they can help you in turn at some point, or not. Like you said, I mean, it doesn't always reciprocate, but that it always starts with your work and putting into the original relationship and really adding value and not expecting anything in return.
Yep, exactly.
So I guess going from that, working with John Lee Dumas and adding massive value to him, and him reciprocating by helping you make some introductions, is that strategy still playing true today? Are you working with other people and it's kind of having this compounding effect?
Yeah. Sorry, that
No worries.
gonna ring a bunch. Let me go turn that off. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, nope, it's good. Okay. Sorry about that,
We're
bro.
good.
Have you either take it out or not? For those of you listening, sorry about that. Okay. So, do I still do this is the question, right? So to answer your question in a very, very frank and honest way, I made an investment this week. It was into a mastermind to get close to a bunch of high level individuals. And it was $100,000 mastermind. It was not a comfortable investment for me, but I just believe in it that much. I believe that relationships are going to be the key, going to be the thing that like brings me up and allows me to see my goals reached in a much, much, much shorter period of time than I would if I just tried to bootstrap it and make it happen on my own. So the answer is yes, I still do that. And even at a much, much higher level now, obviously with, especially with the mastermind that I just joined.
That's awesome, man. That's huge. And I completely agree. I mean, earlier this year, investing in a coach for the very first time, was a very significant investment, but it is literally the last 4 months have been the best 4 months of my life.
Yep.
And it helps you by being around people who are where you want to be, where you want to go. and being able to learn from them, and also, like you're doing so well, is give value to them, add value in their life. And then one way or another, it comes back around.
Yeah. The problem is people value the wrong things, I think is what it is, Evan, because for me, I value my time over everything in every way too. So like, I don't put in a ton of man hours, like physical man hours behind my business. My brain is always thinking. My brain is always turned on and
Yeah.
thinking about ways to improve. But the actual man hours, I have a team of people around me that I pay money to do all those things because I value my time. And I know that some things I would just get frustrated. I would get bogged down in the weeds. And I'm just like, you know what? It's way easier for me just to outsource this and focus on what I'm good at. So the other piece of that is coming into the, oh my gosh, sorry, hang on one second.
No worries.
Sorry, bro. We were supposed to be out of our hotel at 12 o'clock. But I thought we told them 1 o'clock because it's an extra $50 to stay, but I knew we had this interview scheduled. So I'm sorry, your editor's gonna have to do some work on this.
Yeah, no worries.
Can you remind me where I was?
I cannot remember, honestly. Oh, we were talking about the time you put into your business. You're always thinking about it, but you have a team actually doing a lot of the work.
So yeah, so I think it comes down to basically people don't value the right things. They value their money over their time. And I value my time over my money. And so what I mean by that is like, it was $100,000 to join this mastermind, right? Worst case scenario, I lose $100,000. Like, seems like a lot, but it's really not, right? Like comparatively to my life, I'm 27 years old. I just turned 27 like a week ago. Like, I have a lot of life to live. $100,000 is in the like grand scheme of things is not a lot of money. Like it doesn't even cover my expenses for 2 years of living, right? Like, and that's in 2019, let alone in 2040 or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. So like in the grand scheme of things, it's a really, really small amount of money comparatively to the time that I have left here. So, I mean, obviously if everything goes okay, cross my fingers, knock on wood. So my point is people value their money over their time because they're not willing to let go of money in exchange for saving time. And that's what connection is. That's what networking is. That's what connecting with the top 1% is. That's what these masterminds are. They give you that, they let you skip the line a little bit. Like everybody's talking about, how can I get to the next level? It's not about getting to the next level. It's about getting to the next level above the next level. It's about skipping 3-4 levels at a time. It's not about going to the next rung on the ladder. It's about going to 6 rungs up on the ladder and doing that faster than everybody else. That's what I think it is, because I'm willing to invest those types of money to shorten my timeline, because right now it might not save me a ton of time, but it saves me a ton of time on the back end. Because it might take me 5 years to figure out one thing that I learned from somebody who's running a 9-figure business. Somebody that I talked to who's running a 9-figure business that's in this mastermind as well can just be like, hey bro, did you ever think about doing things this way? And it could just be one thing that's just like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Yeah. I implement it. And that just shaved 5 years off of my learning curve. I'm always willing to invest money to save me time, because I value my time over anything else, because that's really all that we have. Like, time is the ultimate asset. You know what I mean? There's people that live completely happy lives with zero money, like in poverty, like eating rice, but they're the happiest people on the planet, because money doesn't really have much to do with our happiness in life. So I think it's our time and what we do with our time, how we spend our time, the experiences that we have, the places that we go, the people that we surround ourselves with, the love that we give and receive, like all those things I think is what makes up a good and happy and fulfilled life. Not just money. And so people like have this like hoarding collection mindset when it comes to money, instead of having that willingness to be able to shave time off of the back end so that they can enjoy their lives a little bit more and skip those rungs on the ladder, shorten that runway to success.
Yeah, and honestly, that's why I've told so many of our listeners, I'm like, you all need to be starting a podcast. If you haven't already, invest in a podcast, invest in learning, invest in yourself, invest in marketing yourself, invest in growing your network, because you're exactly right. I mean, that's why I started my podcast. I met a venture capitalist and I wanted to continue talking to him,
Yeah.
and I needed an excuse. So I literally made it up on the spot. I was like, hey, I have a podcast where I interview people like you. And it's like, sure, I'd love to be on. And just like that, it's like now I have a relationship with somebody who's a venture capitalist, and from there going on to do other things with him. So
yeah, and
you're
you said the
exactly
word
right.
over and over again, and that's really where the mindset shift comes down to, is that people look at it as an expense instead of an investment. And really, if you have less than like $150,000 in your bank account, then the only investments that you should be making is in yourself. Like, stop buying Bitcoin. Stop stop trying to, if you have a great connection in real estate, then maybe put some money in real estate, because I've made some money in real estate before I had that much money in my account. But like, the point is, if you're always, if you've never taken the time to invest in yourself and your skill sets and your relationships, then you have to start there. I think that you should, like, the process is like, make some money, invest in yourself, make some money, invest in yourself, make some money, invest in yourself. And then you can start investing in like assets and other things, because like assets can go away. Like, stocks can depreciate, right? Like, houses can foreclose, but your knowledge and your connections will always be there. So like, the only true investment, the only sure investment, is an investment in yourself, because that's what ultimately is going to give you the ability to go out and create success and wealth and happiness in your life. Like, you brought up Dave Meltzer earlier. Like, David's such a great dude, such a really cool guy. And his story is incredible, because he's somebody that literally was a 9-figure net worth and lost everything, and then started over and redid it. And when I asked him about it, I was like, what was your mindset at that point? And he was just like, honestly, it's just part of the game for me. He's like, money's just energy. It comes and it goes. And he was like, I know that I'm somebody that is always going to attract money into my life. And so like, he knew that, because he had the skill sets to do it. He'd already done it. He had the connections to do it. He knew those people. He built the relationships. He'd already been down that path, and now he can just redo it. The problem, like that. So that's the thing, is like, people make a little bit of money, and then they hold on to it, because it's like, oh, I better not lose this money. Right. And this just comes from this scarcity mindset that doesn't allow them to do the things that they know they need to do to get to the next level, or to skip those levels, because they're so focused on like hoarding that money, keeping it, and not letting it go.
So real quick, before we jump into the monumental questions, one last thing I wanted to ask you was, so you and your wife recently had a baby boy, is that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations first.
Thank you.
And I guess I just want to ask, as far as like what you've learned through Build Your Network podcast and growing that, and learning from all these top people, what would be one thing that you would want to pass on to your son?
That you truly can do whatever you want to do. It's a message that seems generic, because we all hear it all the time, right? Like, you can do whatever you put your mind to, whatever. But I just truly believe it. And the number one thing that I've learned in the last few months is to actually live it. Like, just honestly using this as an example, since we've already talked about it, like that $100,000 investment for me, like, that was a really big investment for me to make that. Right. So oh my gosh, hang on one second. I told these people like 10 times, like, stop bugging me. We're getting out at 1:00, and they keep knocking on the door. But that $100,000 for me, like, that was a big investment, and I went back and forth on it for probably like 3 months. Like, the first time, when the first organizer invited me to join it, I wrestled with it back and forth. I talked to mentors, talked to people. I was just like, I don't know if this is something that I should do, or I should, wait a couple of years. But ultimately, what made the decision for me was that I had my son. And that seems counterintuitive, because a lot of people, when they have a kid, like, do the opposite, and they tend to be super risk averse. But for me, it was the opposite. It was the way that it ended up being, because I don't want to look my son in the eye one day and tell him that he can do whatever he wants, but know that I didn't do what I wanted, because I was too scared, because I wasn't willing to risk it, because like, I just think that's so hypocritical. Like, if you're gonna, like, I don't know how you can do that as a parent. Like, I don't know how I could look in my son's eyes and tell him, you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want. But then when he looks at me and asks me why I'm not what I want, like where I want to be, or why I haven't done what I want to do, and I don't have an answer for him, like, that's a bad situation, because now he's not experienced that. Like, he doesn't know that he can do whatever he wants, because he didn't have an example. I'm sitting here telling him, but I didn't do it myself. So what is that? You know what I mean? Like, I can't fully tell him that and expect him to believe it if I haven't even like showed him that it's possible. And so that's been a huge driving factor for me.
I love that, man. That's honestly, that resonates a lot with me because I completely agree. It's like investing in your dreams, investing in your goals is going to ultimately help your family. It's going to help grow your family, and just have a multiplier effect in your life. So,
Yep, totally.
in wrapping up, let's quickly jump into the monumental question. So, what does success mean to you?
Success to me is a really big self-awareness thing. And that's why, like, I like the way that you phrase that question, because it is what it is to each and every individual. Like, everybody, I think, has a different definition of success. For me, it's freedom. Success to me is freedom, like being able to do what I want, when I want, where I want, with who I want, when I, like all those things. Like that's why I do what I do. And that's what ultimately drives me, because we only get like one shot at life, bro. And I know it's so cliche to say types of things, but if you really sit there and internalize that, it's crazy to think about. We get one shot. So I don't want to be doing it trapped by all the things that everybody else wants me to be doing. I want to be doing them. Like, I want to be surrounding myself with the people that I want to surround myself with. I want to be doing it at the places I want to be doing. I want to, be able to leave and go and do what I want. And like, I want to build my life for like me and my family, not allow life to just, push me around and do whatever everybody else is doing. Like, I think it comes down to really big self-awareness. And for me, that true definition is real freedom.
I love it. What is, do you have like a morning ritual or daily habits?
Yeah. So I'm not, since my son was born, I've not been nearly as good as I used to be with it. It's something I need to get back into. But yeah, I usually wake up in the morning, try to hit the gym, one of the first things. So take some pre-workout and things like that. I try to listen to read at least for 10 minutes, or listen to audio for 10 minutes. Most of the time it ends up being audio, just because I prefer that audio, platform consumption anyway. So it ends up being some sort of audio. And then if I'm really on my game with my routine, then I'll sit down and do some affirmations, a little bit of journaling, and some meditation and stuff. But it's been a few months, honestly, since I've gone through every single one of those things. In the morning.
Understandable.
Get back into it.
And lastly, do you have a favorite book?
There's so many. It's so difficult just to pick one. But I would say that if one that is not as common as like the Think and Grow Rich is and stuff like that is Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. And that was one of the first books that really turned me on to like having a healthy mindset about money. Because so many people, I think, have a really, really unhealthy mindset when it comes to money, just because that's what culture and society shoves down your throat. And especially if you're religious at all, is probably even more so for you, like it was for me. So Secrets of the Millionaire Mind was a big one for me.
That's awesome. So in closing, first off, thank you so much for taking the time, Travis. This was awesome. Listeners are going to get some massive value. But where can our listeners follow you or reach out to you?
Yeah, man. So TravisChappell.com is everything. And Chappell is 2 P's, 2 L's. TravisChappell.com has basically everything that I do on there. I'm probably most active on Instagram and YouTube now. I'm trying to do a little bit more on YouTube. So YouTube is just TravisChappell.com/YouTube. And then Instagram is just at Travis Chappell. So I try to make it pretty easy. So it's just Travis Chappell pretty much everywhere. So if you go to Instagram at Travis Chappell, YouTube, TravisChappell.com/YouTube, you can go check out some of the stuff that we're starting to throw up on video. The podcast has a really large base, but now we're moving into the YouTube space. So we could use some love on the YouTube front. So.
Yes, guys, go subscribe to his YouTube channel and make sure to check out his podcast. Also check him out on Instagram. That's where we connected. And you also have a live event coming up.
Yeah. So Build Your Network Live coming up in the beginning of November 8th through 10th out in Las Vegas. Rented out the whole first floor of Top Golf. And yeah, it's just going to be an amazing time.
That's awesome, man.
You can find tickets there, buildyournetworklive.com.
Yes. Take him up on that. Take him up on everything, guys. He is adding tremendous value in all of his content. And if you guys like today's episode, make sure to share it with Travis, tag him on social media, share it with me. Let us know you're listening. And with that, have a monumental day.